2003, Soros and a partner funded the new $5 million liberal group, MoveOn.org. Well, MoveOn.org, what exactly is that? Well, you remember it. This is the group that originally called General Petraeus General Betrayus. It was despicable. Well, who had they tapped for the executive director of MoveOn.org? This guy, Zach Exley. I've never heard of him before. Do you know who he is? Well, he previously had trained activists for the anarchist group, the Ruckus Society. These are the riots in Seattle, helped orchestrated by this guy. More on that in just a minute. Oh, by the way, he's also a blogger for the Huffington Post, which is interesting because the Huffington Post gets money from George Soros. Oh, and he's also a fellow with the George Soros Open Society Institute. Violent radicals. Oh, and by the way, it's just not that phrase that came. George Soros has been following him as he originally funded the Ella Baker Society, or the Center for Human Rights. And then, of course, he was on the Apollo Alliance. And then when he got fired from the White House, he went to Center for American Progress, which is also funded by George Soros. Radicals. Radicals. Oh, the Open Society Institute, in case you don't know what this is, don't worry, you will in the next couple of days. The Open Society Institute is George Soros' most important group. It is really spectacular. It is his philanthropist arm. This is where he looks for Mother Teresa to give out his precious money. And boy, did he find Mother Teresa. Well, not exactly. He found, to head this organization, the founder of the violent activist group SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. You don't know what they did in the 60s? You will. One string, $425 million every single year. The strings that are being pulled by the puppet master. Let's start with this. Let's just take a couple of examples here on what George Soros has said and then see if there's any connection to anything. Soros spoke at Columbia University. He talked about an urgent need for campaign finance reform. I want you to remember, questioning our elections is important to George Soros. You'll understand in about 20 minutes. Well, he wanted to have campaign finance reform. He thought it was important. He spoke at Columbia University about it. Well, Open Society, his little group, Open Society, started by the guy with SDS, it was one of only a handful of groups who spent $123 million to push finance reform. Soros, quote, said, "Do something about the distortion of our electoral process by the excessive use of TV advertising." So he wanted to make sure that lies couldn't distort things. Well, it wasn't long after that speech at Columbia University that, lo and behold, Senator Russ Feingold, a progressive, and a few months later with John McCain, a Republican progressive, came with a proposal in hand for what would eventually become the McCain-Feingold Act. The irony, if it is that McCain-Feingold ultimately led to the explosion of 501c3 groups, which can advertise at will. 501c3 groups. Oh, 501c3 groups? You mean like Sojourners, or Color for Change, or the Tides Foundation, or Media Matters, or People for the American Way, or MoveOn.org, Center for American Progress, the Apollo Alliance, Elder Saker for Human Rights. You mean those things? You see, we had the McCain-Feingold Act, and then mysteriously, almost unbeknownst to everyone, those groups became very powerful, much more powerful. And guess who controls most of the most powerful? George Soros. After President Obama was elected, George Soros again set the agenda. He said, quote, "I think we need a large stimulus package which will provide funds for state and local government to maintain their budgets because they are not allowed by the Constitution to run a deficit. For such a program to be successful, the federal government would need to provide hundreds of billions of dollars. In addition, another infrastructure program is necessary. In total, the cost would be between $300 and $600 billion range." Well, what was on the first thing on his agenda? The $787 billion stimulus. I remember this, and I remember saying at the time, who wrote this? It was too complex. It was too early in his, oh yeah, that's right, The Apollo Alliance. Where does the Apollo Alliance come from? The Tides Foundation. And where does the Tides Foundation get a lot of their funding? George Soros. His tentacles are everywhere. What is he going through all of this trouble for to achieve? Well, globalization. George Soros believes, quote, the main obstacle of a stable and just world order is the United States. Let that sink in for a minute. The main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States.
People generally play with a certain set of rules. I am particularly interested in changes in the rules of the game.
80 years ago, George Soros was born. Little did the world know then, economies would collapse. Currencies would become worthless. Elections would be stolen. Regimes would fall. And one billionaire would find himself coincidentally at the center of it all. He was born in Budapest, Hungary on August 12, 1930, as George Schwartz, the son of Orthodox Jews. Today, Soros is an atheist who doesn't embrace his Jewish identity and rarely supports Jewish causes or Israel.
I've not been very engaged in Israel.
Why not?
I think there are enough Jews to take care of Israel.
In 1947, the Soros family relocated from Hungary to England, where George attended the Fabian Socialist London School of Economics. He moved to New York in 1956, became a U.S. citizen in '61, and at the age of 39, he started what would become the Quantum Fund, which he would use to attack currencies all across the globe. He later would be blamed for the financial collapses in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia. And who could forget that he was the man who broke the Bank of England in 1992, shorting the British sterling by betting heavily that the currency would collapse, despite government assurances to the contrary.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day. Massive speculative flows continue to disrupt the functioning of the exchange rate mechanism.
The money that I made on this particular transaction, the estimate is about $1 billion.
Along with currencies, Soros also collapses regimes. With his Open Society Fund, which was founded in 1979, Soros has helped fund the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, the Rose Revolution in Georgia. He also helped engineer coups in Slovakia, Croatia, and Yugoslavia. So what is his target now? Us. America.
He said it himself on many occasions. He said, what I have done in other countries in terms of overturning bad governments, I'm going to do in this country.
Our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts.
Political analysts say the shadow party he has built here greatly resembles those he created in other countries before instigating a coup.
He created his own party within a party, or his shadow party outside of the Democratic Party, the Center for American Progress. That was one of the original shadow party groups. This group, from the beginning, was charged with getting control of the conservative media. Many of the people in the Obama administration were just drawn right up from there.
He spent millions in 2004 to drive President Bush out of office. He didn't succeed. But changing the attitude and policies of America, he says, remains his top priority. In one of his books, Soros writes, quote, "The main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States," end quote. You wouldn't want a man like this anywhere near the President of the United States, would you? Soros has been granted at least 4 visits so far to the Obama White House. This, a man who has repeatedly called for the devaluation of the dollar.
A slow decline in the value of the dollar, a managed decline.
He's waged a war against capitalism.
Capitalism is not directly opposed to open society. Nevertheless, it poses some serious threats.
This is a man who wants the world to be one global society without borders or individual governments. One global society and one global gatekeeper.
Now, I just showed you how he collapsed regimes internationally, and now he's aiming at America. Soros has been calling for globalization for decades, saying, quote, to stabilize and regulate a truly global economy, we need some global system of political decision-making. In short, we need a global society to support our global economy. Interestingly, the greatest opposition to this idea is coming from the United States. With the right sense of leadership and with a clarity of purpose, the U.S. and its allies could help stabilize the global economic system. The opportunity is waiting to be grasped. So he knows better. You just don't understand. You see the arrogance. Soros' goal for achieving globalization is done through organizations, puppet organizations, and he remains in the shadow. He's able to pull the strings because he's the money that animates each of these. Soros surrounds himself by radicals and revolutionaries. Let me go back to what I told you at the beginning. George Soros is creating a new structure through a shadow party. He infiltrates politics. He pulls the same playbook out every single time. Ukraine, Croatia, Yugoslavia, Georgia, and Slovakia. The same thing. Here it is, step by step. Step one, you form a shadow government. He's done that. Infiltrate the target country using humanitarian aid, Open Society Institute, or ACORN, whatever they are, as cover. Step two, you control the airwaves. Has he done that? Fund existing radio and television outlets or start your own outlets. We showed you this chalkboard yesterday. This is his media empire. NPR, free press. It's all here. Step three, you destabilize the state. Would you make a case that this is being done? You cause a political or economic crisis, or you take advantage of an existing crisis. Step four, provoke an election crisis, where you don't want to really trust the outcome of an election. You wait for an election, and then you cry voter fraud. This, by the way, La Raza and Acorn funded through OSI, George Soros' charity arm. Step five, stage massive demonstrations, and you accuse opponents of voter fraud through radio and TV stations that you control. Soros has been laying the groundwork for change for the U.S. for decades, going through many of these steps one at a time, sometimes combined. Step one, Soros has established his Open Society Institute in the U.S. Step two, he's been trying to control the airwaves by funding media outlets and attacking Fox News, and they're doing it now with millions of dollars on this program and Fox. Step three, Soros supports massive government spending, which will worsen our deficit crisis, destabilize the state.
The United States should find its proper place in a new world order. They would have to give up some of their privileges.
He's been trying to reorder the world as if he is the creator. Soros has admitted in the past he doesn't believe in God. But that's perhaps because he thinks he is.
Soros himself admits that from the time he was very young, he had megalomaniacal ideas. He said he had messianic fantasies. He said he even thought of himself as a kind of god.
In Underwriting Democracy, he writes, quote, if truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood. In The Alchemy of Finance, quote, I fancied myself as some kind of god.
He's even said that now that I've made these things, these dreams into a reality, I feel more comfortable admitting to the magnitude of my, my ambitions.
In Soros on Soros, quote, I probably couldn't feel all of a piece if I weren't larger than life. To the New Yorker, God in the Old Testament has a number of attributes. Invisible. I was pretty invisible. Benevolent. I was pretty benevolent. All-seeing. I tried to be all-seeing. End quote.
Soros goes further in that he has said that he wants to be the conscience of the world. He was quoted by his biographer, Kaufman.
Yes, I did say that, and actually I stand by it. I think the world very much needs a conscience. I want my foundation network to be the conscience of the world.